From Baylor to BYU to West Virginia, is the Big 12 all of a sudden the forgotten conference in college basketball? This is Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome to a crossover with Locked On Big 12, the number one Big 12 podcast in America, and Locked On Baylor. Thanks for making these shows your first listen every single day. Drake Toll with you alongside Cameron Stewart, who is co-hosting today because his team is one of the many in this league that feels like it got screwed with its March Madness draw. We will start right there. BYU, Baylor, West Virginia, not happy right now. Keyshawn Gilbert and Iowa State, he is out. They are not happy. SEC and Big Ten getting way more love than they deserve. North Carolina is in instead of West Virginia. So many storylines against this conference, which is not shocking at all. We will cover all of them if you hit subscribe. We get to keep our jobs. Cam, let's start as we break down the bracket with the Baylor Bears facing Mississippi State. This is a matchup. A 9 seed was not foreign for Baylor. I'm sure many fans expected to be somewhere around there. ESPN with a 61% chance for the Bears to win it. The Mississippi State Bulldogs are a 1.5 favorite. Before we go BYU, West Virginia, you're the Baylor guy. Is this the right spot for the Bears?
Seed-wise, yes. And it looked like for the whole time they were going to be matched up with the Big East school, which I know really tickles you. Baylor facing a Big East school in the tournament.
I hate it.
Honestly, I do too. Like, Creighton has been a little bit disappointing this year, but like, and I mean, anyone that Baylor's going to play in the first round has probably been disappointing in this year. But Creighton wins in March, dude. They make the Sweet 16s. They make the Elite Eights. The other ones were Marquette. UConn didn't exactly want to face UConn again this year. And instead you get Mississippi State. The only thing I don't like is having Duke as the next one. Obviously, you're going to have a 1 seed as the next one. But Duke, I think, is probably going to win the national championship. So I don't love having that. Mississippi State, honestly, I look at their rundown of the season, and to me, they're barely a tournament team. And Baylor's also barely a tournament team. That's how you get an 8-9. So I would have probably felt more comfortable to have someone outside of the SEC with how good the SEC has been this year. But these two teams, their resumes are pretty identical. So I think it's a fair spot. I've come down a little bit, Drake. Right after they made the selection, I wasn't exactly happy with it, but I have come down to it a little bit. And I think, honestly, the rest of that region is not terrific. Not saying that Baylor's just going to make a run because I don't think they're capable of that. Yeah. But like, Arizona is your 4. If Caleb Love doesn't have, 25 points, can they win a game? BYU, similar situation where they were last year, and then they were a disappointment losing to Duquesne in the first round. Alabama is your 2. That's the best 2 seed I'd like. I know they made the Final Four last year, but they just don't play any defense. And I thought it would catch up to them last year. It didn't really until they got to the Final Four. And I think it'll catch up to them earlier in this tournament. They got the star power, but as the rest of the SEC teams will learn, you got to play defense in this tournament.
Yeah, you just mentioned BYU, and I agree with your take that Duke was a very tough draw for the Bears in March Madness. Cooper Flagg, especially being healthy, will make Duke a juggernaut. This is a BYU school that feels slighted by earning a 6 seed, facing one of the toughest 11 seeds you could draw up in VCU, who's a almost perennial power in March Madness. You hear about them and have since their first magical run. BYU at 53% chance, 57.3% chance to win per ESPN, only a 3.5-point favorite from Las Vegas. This is kind of a nightmare scenario to me for a school that thought it could be a 4 seed.
Yeah, and I think they have every right to be pissed off. Like, how do you put Iowa State and Arizona ahead of them? Like, I mean, they both had expectations coming into this year. Obviously, Iowa State way more so than Arizona. And Iowa State fell apart down the stretch. Like, again, they're still a very good basketball team, and they've been banged up, but they have not shown their true selves the last couple of weeks. And why do they get to be over BYU? Makes a little run in the conference tournament. They've been playing their best basketball over the last month here. Lest we forget, when these two teams, when Baylor played BYU at the end of January, it looked like one of these teams is going to make the tournament and the other's not. Let's see who it's going to be. and they're both in, and BYU's in pretty comfortably. But I think they have a real gripe to not being, a 4 seed or maybe even a 3 seed. They finished third in the conference this year. They finished ahead of Arizona and Iowa State. I don't understand how that comes to be. Like Iowa State, again, good team, obviously top 5 going into the year, right? Top 10 anyway. They have not lived up to it. BYU has turned this thing around mid-season when it was looking shaky in there. I don't get, and remember, this is not a BYU team that's a program that's sneaking up on people, because they were the darling upset pick last year. It didn't come to fruition, but like a lot of analysts were picking them to make a run as a 6 seed. And now it's like, yeah, but they didn't win that game, and they were even better this year, but who cares? I don't get it. Maybe it's part of the scheduling and they need to play on Thursday and Saturday.
Sure.
Maybe, but I don't know how that drops you down 2 whole seeds. I don't know how that drops you down potentially 8 spots.
Then there's West Virginia, 6 quad 1 wins, multiple top 10 wins this season, and they are left out for Bubba Cunningham, the chairman of the committee's school, North Carolina, who gets in with just 1 quad 1 win. A brutal shake for West Virginia in the Big 12 here.
It's an effing disgrace. It's an absolute disgrace, man. Like, you can just stop at 6 quad 1 wins.
Yeah.
5 more than North Carolina. Like, we're talking about a weak ACC that they didn't even play very well in. Like, this was a classic 2 things. I mean, independent of the Bubba Cunningham corruption, which I think is pretty obvious here, is they're a name brand, right? And they felt bad about the lane violation. To which I would say, A, tough crap on the lane violation. Who cares? And B, West Virginia is going to feel slighted too, because they're not North Carolina, but West Virginia is a brand in college basketball. Like they've always had good teams. They've got great fans. I don't get it at all. It's a wild thing, because we thought earlier in this year there was going to be a ton of disrespect to the Big 12. And I think for the most part, they got enough respect in everything outside of West Virginia. And to screw them over like this for a Carolina team that just straight up can't beat good basketball teams is totally embarrassing for the committee. And yeah, the optics are horrendous that Bubba Cunningham is the head of this thing. I just look at this. Look at this.
Yeah.
Ohio State and Indiana, there was like no doubt they weren't going to make it. Nobody had any thoughts that they were going to make it. And they each have better resumes than North Carolina. And that's not even including West Virginia. It's unbelievable to me. This is like corruption to a T.
Yeah. Having Cunningham as the guy that spoke immediately on the selection show right after that call was made was perfect.
And the last part of it, and they said, injuries played a factor. Tucker DeVries' injury.
Right.
In December. The guy gets hurt in December. They're
Right.
one of the great stories of the conference this year because they continued to put it together. I really feel for our Mountaineers, man. I feel for Mountaineer Paul. They got absolutely screwed over in this. Like, I honestly think it's one of the worst host jobs we've seen by the committee in years. We talk about it more with football because there's only 12, but this is an absolute hose job. It's incredible.
Tucker DeVries was injured in 2022, and it was held against West Virginia.
They said, well, they got injuries.
Because no one else in the country has injuries. Coming up, SEC, Big Ten, they got a whole lot of love. 14 teams. Have we forgotten the best conference in college basketball? This is a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Baylor crossover. Today's show is brought to you by Factor. Factor's exactly where I go when I want quality meals and fast. With Factor, you get chef-made, dietitian-approved meals that are ready to heat up and eat in 2 minutes. Fuel your body without the hassle of cooking. Factor meals arrive fresh, never frozen. 40 options across 8 dietary preferences each week. Customize your menu to fit your goals, whether it's Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or Keto. Convenience meets nutrition. I love how Factor keeps you on track with healthy, delicious meals, variety and taste. And beyond just meals, smoothies, breakfast, snacks, so you can have nutrition on the go. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/factorpodcast. Use code factorpodcast to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code FACTORPODCAST at factormeals.com/FactorPodcast to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Today's show is also brought to you by Supply House. As someone who just bought a house, Supply House has been perfect. Get the supplies you need from the site that makes it easy. Supply House, whether you're for plumbing, HVAC, electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Easy to use website and inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400 plus top brands. You'll find exactly what you need delivered fast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support, industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. For trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM. Start ordering plumbing, HVAC, electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Cameron Stewart of Locked On Baylor. Any surprises here that the SEC would be valued enough to have 14 teams in March Madness this postseason? And the Big Ten, once again, overvalued. UNC, a major brand right up there at the top. And the Big 12, even though you have Houston, even though you have Iowa State or Texas Tech, feels underseeded and left behind in pretty much every category.
Yeah, and honestly, the thing that stuck out to me with the whole Big Ten thing is Purdue. So Purdue's sitting there at 22-11 this year. They're a 4 seed. Never at a point this year where you like, yeah, it's a top 16 team in the country, which is what we have to kind of boil it down to here when we're talking about seeding. And you're like, oh, okay, in a vacuum, 22-11, man, they must really like the Big Ten. And then you look at Kansas, 21-12 with the ultimate name brand in the Big 12, and they're sitting there as a 7 seed. They're 1 game worse and they're 3 seeds worse. Really? Or the darlings of the SEC. Oklahoma is 20-13 in the great gauntlet of the SEC, and they're a 9 seed. They're 5 seeds lower than the 22-11 Purdue. So that's what goes to show you of the way they're thinking about that Big Ten conference. And I don't love it. And you see the Ken Palm there, right? They are a little bit higher than Kansas, but they're 2 spots higher than Kansas. And you have them as at least 9 spots lower than Kansas based on seeding. That's where I was like, wow, they are really inflating the Big Ten, who has some damn good teams at the top. But to think of where Kansas finished in the Big 12 in their conference, and where Purdue finished in their conference, have one as a 4 and one as a 7, it just baffles me. Like, what and what Big Ten run do you look at? I know Purdue made it to the national championship game last year. They were a really good team. They were 1 seed, but like, what Big Ten run by like a 4 or a 5 seed inspires this committee that every year they're overpicking Big Ten teams?
And as upset as you can be with the Big Ten, I don't understand how the SEC has come to the forefront of college basketball the way that it has. To me, the Big 12 is dominant year in and year out. This has not been something controversial. 9 of the last 11 years at the top conference in college basketball. That is consistency at the very top. SEC wants to claim football. The Big 12 easily has a stake in basketball. And now we're pretending for some ungodly reason the SEC is the greatest basketball conference to ever grace Earth. And yes, if every team has a great non-conference, it's like you've set yourself up for conference play just being this darling thing where, I guess everyone was good for 13 games, so now you can only be good for the rest of time. Like they played 13 solid games, and from there on out, the SEC got the benefit.
Yeah, and I honestly, like, I look at this matchup that Baylor has with Mississippi State and just looking at these 2 teams, and one coasted on their conference, and it was not Baylor. You know, Baylor had one of the toughest schedules in the country this year. Their non-con was an absolute gauntlet. They didn't do very well with it, which is one thing. But Mississippi State had really 2 signature wins this year, if we can call them that. One of them was against Memphis in the non-conference. The rest of the teams they were playing were garbage, man. Like, they weren't playing Gonzaga on the road. And I look at Baylor, a team that struggled all year, struggling putting a couple of wins together. And they have, again, 2 signature wins, one over St. John's in November, the other over a Kansas team that ended up faltering down the stretch. And Mississippi State's ahead of them. on the 8-9 line. Mississippi State beat Utah by 5 in the non-conference schedule. They played Utah, they played SMU, they lost to Butler, they played Prairie View, which Baylor plays some of those teams too, but they don't have the high end in that non-conference schedule. And kind of leading me to my point of the SEC is like, it might seem antiquated, but should any conference ever have 12 teams in there at least, right? Like no teams that finish 12 and 13th and 14th in your conference should be playing in the NCAA tournament. In theory, yes, they can still be part of the best 68 teams, but they've proven to you they're not going to compete at that level. They're not going to win at that level. That's how you finish 12th and 13th in your conference. That's where I maybe think too simplistically about the NCAA tournament. I would rather have another team from an automatic qualifying conference, like Indiana State last year is the example I keep bringing up. I'd take that over a 12th place team in a major conference. I don't care how good the conference is. Like you gotta win those games. Those are big games. That's your audition into the tournament. And I look at Mississippi State and Oklahoma, and they didn't win those games. They finished way down. They were like 10, I think 9th for Mississippi State, 13th for Oklahoma. That's where I'm losing the plot here. And they never, as good as the Big 12 was the last 7 or 8 years when they were putting a team in the Final Four each year, they were well respected. They were never respected that much. Yeah. I think you could agree with that. They were never respected the way the SEC was this year.
No, not at all. Even when the Big 12 had its best years, much better than what I'm seeing from the SEC this year. And multiple national analysts have asked the question, is the SEC overrated? Have we just overrated them this entire time? And the answer is probably yes here. An example I want to go to in the ACC is not just North Carolina, but also where they have slated Clemson in this thing. I don't understand how the ACC has gotten more love. I know the Big 12 got in significantly more, but the brand of North Carolina and Clemson, we're talking about them on the football side, breaking away from the ACC. Now, all of a sudden, they sniff some success in basketball, and Clemson is above BYU, and North Carolina is in with one quad, one win.
Yeah, I think, honestly, what they look at with Clemson is they were the only team to beat Duke in the conference. And that shouldn't get you a 5 seed. Clemson's a tournament team, but it shouldn't get you to a 5 seed. Yeah. And you could, you could use the same thing with BYU, like, what we talked about in the first segment of how can two teams behind them in their conference standings be ahead of them in the seeding. And that same thing goes with Clemson. It's a much worse conference. I know Brad Brownell has his thing with the Big 12 and they knocked Baylor out last year. It's tough for me to talk on that end, but like the ACC is nowhere close. And the fact that we shoehorned 5 ACC teams in there is pretty incredible to me. Clemson, I don't know. I don't think, and I've only watched them like twice this year. I don't think they're as good as they were last year. And here they are at 5, better seed.
Yeah, I am. If I'm playing Clemson, I'm a Big 12 school. I'm not very worried. If I'm playing North Carolina and I'm a Big 12 school, also not very worried.
If I'm a team of any kind of quality facing North Carolina, anything that would be considered a quad 1 game, I'm feeling good.
I would rather face Clemson than Louisville, and Louisville drew the 8th seed out of this thing. Yeah. And the job that Lutz has done there in year 1 has been incredible. And now they're an 8th seed and going to have to fight their way past a 1 in their second round game. Coming up, Iowa State, no more Keyshawn Gilbert in March Madness. Oh, that's not good. That's really not good. This is a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Baylor crossover. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is the number 1 place to go during March Madness to place live bets, not just pregame, but also live. Say you missed that shot. Oh, no, I was going to bet on Baylor to win the game, and you missed it. Well, with March Madness being here and Baylor being in the middle of a game, you can now have a chance to get in on the action with live betting. New customers get $250, make it $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who's cutting down the nets. So I've got my eye this year on some underdogs like Yale over Texas A&M. And with the tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on, especially live. The FanDuel app is simple to use. When I win, I get paid instantly, no waiting around. FanDuel.com to get in on the college hoops action all tournament long with FanDuel. Cameron Stewart of Locked On Baylor. Iowa State without the services of Keyshawn Gilbert in March Madness now. Taman Lipsey already banged up. Milan Momcilovic was banged up during the later parts of the year. This is a team that needed rest. They got that with an extra couple days off at the Big 12 tournament. I didn't mind that. I do think that I mind this part. Iowa State, who faces Lipscomb, losing Keyshawn Gilbert.
Yeah, that's really tough. I mean, you talk about a team that's been battling injuries. It has been really up and down towards the end of this year. They went from like Curtis Jones is the best kept secret in the country to Curtis Jones, carry us, please. I'm going to look at this very simplistically with Keyshawn Gilbert. You know, we've all watched him play. We see the kind of impact he has in the game, but just from a statistical standpoint, 14 points and 4 assists a game. Think about that. That's 11 baskets that he's created that you no longer have. Now, Iowa State's a talented team. They can make up some of that. But that is a big time loss when it comes to the most important games of the year. An all Big 12 player, an all conference player leaving your roster.
Yeah.
It's pretty tough. I don't know how much look, they could beat Lipscomb, but can we bring up that part of the bracket again? I don't know how much further the road goes for them. Ole Miss, if Ole Miss is in there, they're playing one of the play-in 11 seeds. Like if we're gonna give some respect to the SEC, Ole Miss would need to beat Iowa State for me. Like that's a danger team. We know how Chris Beard is in the tournament. But it's just Iowa State went from a Final Four team, a team that I very much thought was capable of going to the Final Four 2-3 weeks ago, to it's gonna be a dogfight to get out of the first weekend with the way they've played, but also this Keyshawn Gilbert injury situation. He's a huge part of what they do, man.
I am once again, and you can make the argument whenever all the time people do that. Yeah, well, play the Big 12 tournament. Come on, don't forfeit that. This is another example of just doing things a little bit too hard, going a little bit too far when you're pushing toward March Madness and crap hitting the fan and looking around and going, oh, shoot, what should we have load managed? Should we have done something here to keep a guy like Keyshawn Gilbert off of that injury list? And I'm like, he only played 10 minutes against Cincinnati or something, like 10, 12 minutes against Cincinnati in the Big 12 tournament. But still, guys, he's dealt with groin injury issues. And now all of a sudden it goes from, some injury issues to he's out for all of March Madness. And you have to have a guy like this to make as deep of a run as Iowa State expected to make. Yeah,
and past even the injury thing about the conference tournament, I think we saw it with Houston last year. Like the way that Houston plays, it's a very similar way to the way Iowa State plays. Like that takes a lot out of you when you're doing it 3 days in a row in the conference tournament. Then you got to go and travel and play somewhere else, play someone really good the next week. That to me is a bigger factor for teams like Iowa State and like Houston. We saw what it did to Houston last year. Houston was banged up. You add 3 more games. They don't even win the thing. And Jamal Shedd's out in the Sweet 16. Keyshawn Gilbert's not quite as good as Jamal Shedd, but he is pretty important to what they do. It's gonna seem like a waste now. It absolutely will.
Looking at the bracket as it sits, Iowa State to me has the second easiest.
I like that Rothstein said hasn't played since March 12th, by the way. Which is just, as if that wasn't 4 days ago.
Yep.
But
round one, this, their first round of the Big 12
last
tournament.
Game basically that they played.
Iowa State Lipscomb to me is an Iowa State win because of their defensive prowess. Ole Miss gets a little bit
also
tougher.
Because I can't tell you where Lipscomb is.
Tennessee,
Georgia, Tennessee. Okay, that makes sense.
It's the second easiest path still because Ole Miss does not scare me that much.
I just don't know a lot about Ole Miss. That's a good point. Like I know Chris Beard, but I really don't know. And that was an Ole Miss team that was in the top 25 by the time the conference season started, and they haven't been in it basically since. So that's a damning thing. Sorry.
So I think that is the second easiest path to the Sweet 16 outside of Houston, who got Gonzaga. And I don't love the draw. I don't hate it completely, but I don't love the draw. This to me is the easiest of the Big 12 schools to make the Sweet 16. Texas Tech facing UNC Wilmington, and then the winner of Missouri and Drake. And then from there, the winner of Kansas, Arkansas, St. John's, and Omaha. I think St. John's could very well be a Final Four team, but it feels like to me, Texas Tech, their trip to the Sweet 16 isn't all that bad.
Yeah, because you look at that 6-11 and it's like they seem like two danger teams, not teams that you know a lot about, but you're like, oh man, if this thing can go right, they can. And that's just not the way you need to look at it. If you're Texas Tech on the other side, Tech's better than those teams, right? I think Tech has been slighted a little bit all year long, but a 3 seed feels like where they should be. I think that's the only Big 12 team other than Houston that I'm like, yeah, that's where they should be. And so yes, Tech should be there. Tech should be there playing in the next weekend. And you look at the other side, I mean, St. John's to me, like you said, I think that's a Final Four team. And so that's where it gets really tough. But Tech can play a couple different styles, man. I think they can absolutely make a run at this thing. Kansas and Arkansas, that's a fascinating one, by the way.
I do like the Kansas, Arkansas. The fact that it's Calipari, Bill Self, and Rick Pitino, all three in the same.
So good, man.
In the same hotel.
And Grant McCaslin.
in the same arena. Yeah. They're all sitting right there. And then, I mean, McCaslin's right there, as well as whoever Drake has hired to replace Darian DeVries, and they're right back in the March Madness fold.
Yeah, they get the last laugh, don't they? We're in the tournament.
Also,
Darian DeVries is not.
Tech has a very good shot to end up playing Drake in this matchup. I don't have a ton of confidence in Missouri. If you ask Haslametrics, they have Texas Tech beating a team like Drake by 10 points ultimately. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if that's who they get, because Missouri likes to play very fast. Texas Tech will beat Missouri by 4 if you asked Haslametrics. Drake likes to play slow. Typically, those defensive slow teams win. And with Tech also being defensive and slow, I think they beat Drake because they have the better athletes out of the two. This is March. Anything can happen. As we take another look at other Big 12 schools in the bracket, we haven't talked a lot on Houston yet. Let's touch on the Cougars, SIU Edwardsville in round 1, then that winner of Gonzaga and the winner of Gonzaga and Georgia. As I've said, I think Tech has the first easiest path to a Sweet 16. Iowa State not too far behind them. And that's just because Houston facing Gonzaga it's not one of those you go, oh yeah, sure, they'll beat whoever,
Don't love that. Do not love that, man.
Most years your 8 is like Nebraska. Like, they'll beat Nebraska. Gonzaga's
not a team that's made the Sweet 16 the last decade.
Yeah, this is a team built for March.
Yeah, that's the one that really stuck out to me for Big 12 teams, other than like the seeding parts of it, was like, ooh, you're gonna get Gonzaga round 2. Last year they didn't look very good either. They were whatever, like a 6 seed, and they kicked the crap out of Kansas in that second round, and they got to the Sweet 16. This is just what they do. Mark Few, this is his month. When it gets to April, it gets pretty tough for them. They don't do well then, but in March they do really well. And for a team in Houston, psychologically, that's gone out too early each of the last 3 seasons, I think that's a bad draw.
You mentioned Mark Few not having a ton of success in April. Kelvin Sampson's also kind of in that category of like, not the best April guy in the world, but certainly really solid in March. I think Houston could walk its way to the Final Four, given the draw that it got. Any other big surprises from the bracket?
I'm surprised they went with 68 teams this year.
Usually 64, and they made it a field of 68. Brett Yormark won 78 or whatever.
76, I think, is what he wants. And someone in my comment section was just like, it should be 76, you idiot. And that was just it. Like, no explanation. I was like, oh, sure. Yeah.
Well, the only thing, and I told Ward Whites this on the press box when I was on I think, Friday.
It's a huge spot for you.
Is you think about schools like UTSA, Karen Aston women's basketball. They go, I think, undefeated in conference play, and then losing their conference tournament in the quarterfinals. Just oops, we had one bad game, and now you're out of March. It's crazy. What are we playing the regular season for in some of these smaller conferences if it only matters when it comes down to the conference tournament? Like, just don't give them film. Give no one film.
Would it be easier? Like, this is a real quick thought at the end here. Would it be easier if you just took automatic qualifiers from the mid majors for the regular season championship? Like, or you know what? I'm not putting this well. Like, I think you should have 2 automatic qualifiers. You should have a regular season and a conference tournament one. And obviously, for a lot of years, teams are going to win both.
Right.
And then that can allow for a West Virginia or an Ohio State, and 5 more teams, and then North Carolina. I think if you're going to expand to 76 or 84, whatever it's going to be, I think that's the way to do it. incentivize the regular season championship because it's more impressive than the conference tournament championship.
Correct.
And then you'll have some years, like last year where St. Louis won the Missouri Valley tournament, but Indiana State was wire to wire the best team, and they won in the regular season. I think that's a good way to go about it.
It was Drake that won the MVC last
Drake,
year.
yeah, whatever.
Yeah, and
stupid name.
They're back again. That is Cameron Stewart of
I always get them mixed up for some reason.
At Real Cam Stewart and Locked On Baylor. This has been and always will be Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Dose Grande.